Okay, so this is a session which is supposed to be about North Stars, and I want to give a really boring North Star, which is that we want to have systems that are both pluralistic and stable at the same time. This actually is something which is pretty hard to do, and we're going to have to generate new forms of practical knowledge to get there. So right now we've got a lot of pluralism. Look at American democracy, for example, but that pluralism is turning in some pretty toxic ways. It is destabilizing the systems that we want to contain it, and we want to channel it and make it useful. And things are likely to get worse. There's a lot of discussion about information technology and its contributions to making pluralization toxic, and we're going to see more and more of that. We've got a lot of debate at the moment about whether or not social media platforms do or do not lead to polarization and spiraling disagreement. Over the next few years, we're going to see increasing discussion of the consequences of large language models, ways in which they can generate bullshit at scale, and what kinds of consequences this might have for the ways in which we actually try to figure out how to agree, how to disagree. When we have real citizens contending with fake voices, we're going to have to create a whole lot of new systems to deal with this. Now, problem is, where do we go for the knowledge that we need to build this? Engineers aren't necessarily particularly well trained to think about this, even if engineers are building the systems that are really reshaping the world around us. This is in part because they love to think about things in terms of optimization. Optimization is a fantastic set of tools, but if you have fundamentally clashing values, you cannot put those together into the neat functions that you can then figure out how to optimize. Now, I'm a social scientist. I would love to be able to come and say that political scientists have the answer to this. In fact, in some ways, I think we're actually worse. We can talk about clashing values until the cows come home. What we cannot do is think about how to deal with some sort of these clashing values in ways that promote robustness and stability. Our first instinct when we see a difficult problem like this is not to figure out how to solve it, but instead to figure out how to study it and how to write academic papers around it. So, what do I think we need? I think we need, and some of you may recognize the reference here, what I'm going to call piecemeal democratic engineering. And the idea here is something that is like engineering, but much more like building dry stone walls, that you have all of these different, irregularly shaped bits and pieces that you try to pull together somehow into stable, self-supporting structures that do good and useful things. And this is going to require drawing on social sciences, drawing on engineering, drawing on a whole lot of other knowledge. And it's going to be very difficult to do. We're going to have to get comfortable with complexity because many of the problems that we're trying to deal with and many of the tools that we want to use to deal with them are going to be fundamentally complex in their application in the technical sense of the word, which Scott Page and other people can tell you about. We're going to have to start from human beings as they are, not the ways in which we tend to model them. They are not neat mathematical abstractions. There's a ton of good working cognitive science here that we can build upon, which suggests, for example, that human beings, and this is not a point which is unique to cognitive science, as the quote from Aristotle demonstrates, human beings are fundamentally political animals. We have modules in our brains for coalitional politics to figure out who is winning, who is losing, which side we ought to be on, and this means that any system of pluralism that we create is going to have all of that messiness and partisanship and many other things which people would love to engineer away, but cannot engineer away without re-engineering the human brain, which is probably a bad idea. We want to start also, and this is a particular temptation to avoid for people here, we want to start from problems rather than from solutions. We have a tendency to geek out on neat mathematical tricks. We want to start, as Lynn Ostrom did, by figuring out what the problems are that people want to confront and then building ways to do this. This will often involve building on what is already there. There is a lot of practical wisdom in institutions that are already there. We cannot start from blank slates. We're going to have to make our systems secure against multiple different threats. Think about information security, the ways in which people talk about threat models and attack surfaces. Apply that to democratic and pluralistic structures because the system will inevitably be gamed. And finally and emphatically, we cannot get rid of disagreement from these systems. Disagreement instead needs to be the fuel that we actually use to try and make pluralism work. James Evans and his colleagues have fantastic work on Wikipedia, which talks through how this works and how this can work. Even in Wikipedia, which is a pretty flawed system, you can turn stubborn, persistent sort of disagreement into something that is socially useful. This will involve a lot of experimentation and iteration. And with that, I will leave you and thank you.